Right now we're joined by Karen Chase, who's the chair of the 32nd District Democrats, here for yes on I-522. So go ahead with up to 5 minutes presenting why we should vote on 522.
Absolutely. My name is Karen Chase, as was previously mentioned, and I'm chair of the 32nd Legislative District. It's my pleasure to address the 36th LD tonight on Initiative 522, which is to label genetically engineered foods. As you may or may not know, Initiative 522 gathered signatures. It was the second largest signature gathering effort to over 300, let's see, I think it was 340,000 signatures to have this initiative go to the legislature. And this legislature this year, the legislature had many Senate hearings and hearings in the House. However, the legislature chose not to act on this initiative, and now it goes to the people in a vote November 5th. What this initiative is about labeling and about transparency. It's about giving shoppers, you and me, information about the foods we buy so that we can make informed decisions as we buy food for ourselves and our family. It's very, very simple. 64 other countries around the world have initiatives and regulations on labeling genetically engineered foods, and the people of the United States and Washington State deserve the same right to know what's in their food. It's simple. It's about labeling. And with that, I'd love to open it up for more questions.
Great.
Yes?
This is
Clayton.
this is kind of an interesting situation. I really didn't know a lot about genetically engineered foods until Elizabeth Walter was kind enough to send out material last week, and I read it all. And I just happened to be going to a club downtown. I happened to be there having lunch by myself last week on Thursday, and there were two businessmen sitting there talking. And one guy was trying to sell the other guy on all of this super equipment that uses GPS to find land that they can grow genetically, and it tells them exactly what kind of genetically engineered things they need to do in those lands.
Interesting.
And one of my concerns has always been enough food to feed our country. And I don't know whether this is true or not, but the guy said, there's only, if we were to eat the diet the U.S. Department of Agriculture recommends, with vegetables and fruits and so forth.
The food, it's not a pyramid anymore, it's a plate, yes.
We would only have 15 days worth of food to feed our own country. And so it's absolutely necessary for us to use land that was heretofore not available to us, but now might be available with certain genetically engineered foods. So I'm just curious about, I'm strongly supportive of this. This is clearly something that we need to have. But I'm just curious about the whole concept of genetically engineered foods and people who argue that we need it not only for ourselves, but to feed the world.
Well, that's a really interesting question. It's something that I think definitely is worth pursuing further, but I want to draw it back to the initiative, because what this initiative is about is not making a judgment call on whether we need genetically engineered foods, whether it's going to feed the world, just whatever. It's not making that judgment call. It's about, if we have it, let's label it. Just like we label sodium levels, just like we label of country of origin for meats, and if it's produced in a nut factory, it's just about labeling. And so I think it's a deeper question you're asking, but it's not really germane to the yes on 522.
It's simple, it's about labeling.
Wait, I don't. Wait, so Clayton and then David.
Except that I find that rather disingenuous. In that, yes, sure, it's about labeling, but the purpose of the labeling is so that people can not buy it, thereby greatly confusing the conversation that John had overheard. So what about that on the one hand, and what about the practical effects of implementation?
Okay, so two things. One, implying that a label makes a judgment call. So for instance, on a can of pop, it says phenylalanine. Now, I don't know if there's some people that have concerns about that. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. But having that label on there that phenylalanine or high fructose corn syrup is on there may mean something to some people, but not necessarily to everybody. So a label that has genetically engineered foods means something to somebody and nothing to somebody else. It's more information. So I understand why it may seem disingenuous, but I don't see it that way. I see it as more information so that if somebody wants to know more about it, they can research it for themselves. You know, every one of these ballot measures is going to have proponents and opponents that are going to be making claims like that. But if you really think about it, it's just a label to give added information, just like sodium levels, just like salt, high fructose corn syrup, phenylalanines, what's in here now? Aspartame. It's that kind of thing. It's labeled. And wait, what was the other part was
Practical implications.
Yeah.
practical implications. As far as labeling, well, Wheaties, Cheerios, Coca-Cola, they change their labels all the time. It's a cost of doing business. So as far as implementation, just like, I don't know if you can see it, these 64 other countries require that these have labeling requirements. It's nothing that's going to be too terribly difficult to implement because labels are changing all the time. At least, you know, every 18 months you're going to see a different label on a box of cereal or a can of coffee. So implementation isn't going to cost that much. Does that answer the question? Or are you talking about how the Department of Health is going to be?
Well, we're actually out of
Oh, I'm
time on that
sorry.
question.
Oh, okay.
So let me go David, and then John A, and then Elizabeth.
But I'd like to pick up on Clayton's practical implications question.
Absolutely.
Right, and you know, genetic modification of food, arguably, is what saved us from the Great Depression, right? Because, you know, prior to the Depression, there was the Dust Bowl, and there was Pioneer Seed Company, Henry Wallace, a progressive Democrat, his family developed a process of creating the hybrid corns and things that were more water, needed less water, So some of this has been with us for a long time and has had very positive benefits for mankind. It is a true fact that Pioneer Seed Company was bought by Monsanto back in 1964 for $400 million. Fair chunk of change at the time. But the origin of, and I apologize for the preamble, but what Clayton said about the practical implications does resonate with me. Not in the sense that, because I agree that stuff should be labeled, right? But in the sense that what level of you know, is a hybrid kernel of corn genetically modified, and thus, if that's what's used in cornflakes, which by the way would represent the totality of the corn crop of the United States.
So
right?
I think what you're asking is what the definition of
What is
genetically
the
modified or genetically engineered.
thank you.
Yeah. Does the initiative clarify what the definition of
Where does
what would meet the qualifier?
clarify? Because from an agricultural
Right.
perspective, we've been using hybrid seeds since the 1920s. That's the question.
So, yes, the initiative does clarify. I've actually got a copy of the initiative I don't want to pull out and bore you, but there's specific definitions of genetically engineered foods, such as the salmon that's being combined with, genetically combined with genes of different species that would not occur in nature. So we have a frankenfish coming down the pipe. Because I think the ballot might be at the bottom there. That's combining with an eel pout, an Atlantic salmon, and a Chinook salmon. Okay, that's genetically engineered in a lab to create a species that does not, a fish that would not exist in nature. And so that kind of genetic engineering is what we're talking about, is labeling, for instance, the genetically engineered fish that's coming down the pipe. We've got the corn that's genetically engineered to resist Roundup. So that's Roundup resistant corn. That's something that has been engineered in a lab that would not be occurring in nature. And the initiative does address that. I would have to pull out the whole thing if we did right there. I don't think I would bore you there. But those are your concerns. Is it specifically defining genetically engineered as separate, like from like a breeding plant for seeds, that kind of thing? It is clarified in the initiative. And so those things would be labeled, like the frankenfish, and I believe it is sugar beets, corn, papaya, and currently right now, they're approved. There's wheat, but it's not approved. We have that genetically engineered wheat scare in Oregon, but that was not approved wheat. So that, but could be coming down the pike.
Yeah, I apologize.
No, that's okay.
That
John?
would answer your question. It's like-
It's just, it's the one,
I can
it is,
answer it
later.
it is the one area of this initiative, which I support, right? That I've really
You wanna be
struggled
really
with
clear.
because I just have some understanding of the history of
Okay.
of agriculture.
So John A.
So
and
you just
Elizabeth.
touched on my question, which was the genetically engineered wheat that caused down in Oregon, that caused Japan to go into a, we don't want any of your wheat mode. So how would we, what would the labeling look like? If you're talking about a Roundup resistant wheat kernel.
Well, farmers know what they plant.
Yeah.
And so it would be a matter of tracking. They know what they plant, and so it would be a matter of tracking and labeling it from the seed level on up.
It
And
does
so-
seem to be kind of a fuzzy line though between hybrid and laboratory. Maybe not.
Not according to biologists.
Yeah.
Okay, so Elizabeth and then back to Clayton.
So, practical aspects of it, and some people bring up that labeling is going to cost a lot more money and such, and one of the things is we export our own products to overseas, to the EU, which often requires these labels. So, how much expensive will it be then for us to do what we're already doing, essentially, by exporting our food?
Yes, Cheerios label when they're exported to Europe, and they change the label, and there have been no price increases. Hershey's does. I mean, it is something that is a cost of doing business. If there's labeling requirements, the labels are changed.
And if they want to go into the EU, they have to.
They have the label.
Okay, Clayton?
When I go into the supermarket, I have certain odds of, I'm faced with, in the vegetable department, I'm faced with the dichotomy of organic and non-organic. And I have, let's say, a 50-50 chance of going organic. If I have, say, half the non-organic vegetables labeled GMO, I'm not going to buy the GMO.
Organic can't be GMO. Or
Or
organic.
non-organic.
Not, yeah, conventional, yeah.
Right? So my odds are going to change, and I'm not going to buy this stuff. Right? So that's going to have a practical effect. What's the practical effect?
The practical effect is you will have information to make your own personal choice. Is that if you go into a store
What's the
and
effect? Large scale, macro scale on the economy.
well, that's a good question, and I can't answer that. But what I can answer is that having the information out there is more important to have the transparency, so that people can make their own choices, and then we'll see what the effect on the market is. I mean, seriously, if you've got a corn labeled, if you've got conventional corn, and it may or may not matter to you whether it's genetically engineered or not, but right now, that choice is taken away from you. If you care if it's genetically engineered, there's no way in the world for you to make an informed choice until it's labeled, until there's something on that bin that says genetically engineered or not. And so it's about you having the information to make that choice. There's some people it's not going to matter to, but I'll tell you what, there's a lot of people it does matter to, and so let's have that information out there.
Yeah.
So the No campaign responded to my inquiry, and they're coming tomorrow. And of course, we can ask them to respond to what you're telling us today.
Sure.
Can you sort of anticipate what they're going to tell us tomorrow? What arguments are they making, and what is your response to those arguments?
Well, the big argument they're making is that it's going to cost more. And that's just simply not true. As we've seen, we just talked about here now that it's a cost of doing business, the labels change. So your Cheerios are not going to go up if we have a labeling requirement. Just as Cheerios are labeled over in Europe when they're sold over there, it's just not going to be the case. I'm not sure what else they're having to say. One thing that they know is they're going to be spending, they've got 5 donors. They've got Monsanto, Dow, Bayer, who's the other one? 2 other corporates that's just escaping my mind here. While this campaign has over 4,000 Washington state donors, yes, Dr. Bonner's is one of the largest donors and they are not in state, but PCC is donating, and we've got the majority of our donors are small local grassroots people that live in Washington state that want information and who want to have it labeled. And so that's one of the things that depending on what they're going to come up, what's going to come up with, we know that this campaign is going to be outspent, and we know there's going to be a lot of TV ads that are going to try to confuse people, because confused voters, are not informed voters. And so we want to get accurate information out there that this is specifically about labeling. It's not making a judgment call. It's not going to increase prices, but it's going to give us, you, me, information so we can make informed decisions in our democracy. That's what it's all about.
So one of the concerns they will bring up
Yeah.
is that the exceptions are arbitrary. What do you have to say to that?
That the exceptions are arbitrary, they're not arbitrary at all. This initiative was written with global standards, so it is in line with global standards. It wouldn't make any sense to make this initiative any stronger than global standards. So it's in line with global standards. Pizza right now isn't labeled, so pizza's not going to be labeled. Deli food's not labeled now. This doesn't call for it to require making labeling. So, it is not any stronger than global standards in laws that we have right now.
You mentioned that PCC was supporting the campaign. What about Whole Foods? If they
Oh, they are, yes, Whole Foods is also. I don't believe they donated us, we've got donors right there.
Yeah.
So yeah, Whole Foods is very much, and as a matter of fact, I think Whole Foods is
Just a few weeks ago.
either labeling or phasing out genetically modified foods from their store within the next, I believe it was 4 years. So they've taken a really strong stand.
And that's nationwide, right?
That's nationwide. So we're talking about the implications. Well, Whole Foods is addressing the concerns of their market. People want it labeled, so let's label it. It's about transparency. It's about information for us. And frankly, if these companies are so happy about their genetically engineered foods, what's the problem with labeling it?
Okay, we have time for about one more question. If anyone has one?
Just
Yeah,
some
Larry?
clarification, when John
Sure.
was talking about finding places to grow it, that the unmodified foods could not be grown? Did I get that right? Is that what you
Well,
were saying?
what they seem to be saying, and again, I had no business overhearing them, but they're the only other people in the restaurant.
Yeah.
What she seemed to be saying is that the new technology they have can identify land that you couldn't grow a crop on,
And now you can?
and now you can
For some reason.
with certain types of GMO.
Do you, I mean,
I actually haven't heard that. I mean, technology is changing. What I have seen are studies that are showing that organic practices that are sustainable, working with the soil, crop rotation, different crops, are being borne out to be quite sustainable and as effective as using a genetically modified crop, which is actually one of the problems is increased pesticide use. That's one of the concerns the farm workers are having, is that as the weeds are being, Roundup Ready, as more Roundup is sprayed on here, the weeds are becoming more resistant, and so there's an increased pesticide use. So in that context, organic farming and sustainable farming as a way of managing the food crop is beyond the scope of what we're talking about right now, but now you've got
Material indicated that.
something, yeah.
Your
so
material
it's,
indicated that, I thought it was impressive.
yeah, so it's very interesting, what you can do with GPS, and I'm sure the hundreds of farmers that are supporting Yes on 5-2 would be interested in that kind of technology to help them grow what they're growing right now.
Great. we're about out of time. You want to take us 30 seconds to
Sure,
make a closing
absolutely.
statement?
Again, it's my pleasure to address the 36th, and I look forward to talking about this further, and I actually do enjoy being videotaped. Again, Initiative 522 is about transparency, it's about labeling, it's about being really clear that it is about labeling and not making a judgment call so that you and I can have all the information to make informed choices, which is what our democracy, after all, is all about, isn't it? And my name is Karen Chase. I'm chair of the 32nd District Democrats. Karen.chase@32democrats.org. I would be happy to answer any questions. And thank you very much for your consideration.
Great, thank you very much.